Yeah. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Dr. Danisha Keating Show. I am so excited to have my new friend Brian on the show. Just a reminder, the show is all about the table talk conversations and being able to sit with someone and say, I'm here to understand where you're coming from with any topic that we talk about. But the rules are we can't yell or scream or talk over each other. We have to ask questions to understand where the other person's coming from. And we are inviting you to be the fly on the wall to hear how we're going to navigate this conversation. So, Brian, I want you to introduce yourself and then you're going to take it away and then we will jump into what our topic is.
Oh, my word. It's a joy to be with you, Danisha, and I'm just excited to be part of what God is doing through you in this ministry.
Thank
So,
you.
I am a professor of economics and community development at Covenant College. I'm also the founder of something called the Chalmers Center, which equips churches and Christian ministries to work amongst people who are poor more effectively. From a
Mm.
very young age, I felt called to be part of God's story amongst people who are poor.
Mm.
And God led me to the field of economics, which is a discipline that you can use to address issues of poverty. And so this is just a lifelong journey. And God has brought me on a very different path from what I ever imagined I would be doing in this space. I thought I'd be working at like a global policy level or something and being at the World Bank or something. And instead, I do lots of strange grassroots things and help
Yeah.
churches to minister more effectively. That's my life.
I love it. Now, you are also an author. Like you didn't say that part, but you are, and I love that. Can you explain what your book is, When Helping Hurts?
Yeah, yeah. So uh, uh, I'm trying to think how to jump into it really quickly. Uh,
Take your time. Take
there's
your
so
time.
much in my mind right now. It's been a really busy week. Uh, we wrote when helping hurts is an outgrowth of the work of the Chalmers Center. And again, the
Mm,
Chalmers Center focuses on equipping the local church and Christian ministries to work amongst people who are poor in more effective ways.
mm,
What we realized is that the way that most Americans think of poverty as a lack of some material resource, a lack of food, a lack of shelter, a lack of housing. Of course, that is part of the story, but
mhm,
that understanding of poverty as a lack of material resources
mm,
is a disconnect from the way that most poor people experience poverty. Plenty of
mm.
research has been done, and if you ask poor people the question, "What is poverty?" They're not just going to say it's about a lack of food or clothing or shelter. They're going to say, "I feel less than human. I feel
Mm,
inferior. I feel like I can't affect change in my life." And so the poor tend to define their poverty in far more psychological and social terms, even spiritual terms.
yeah,
And we tend to define poverty in material terms. It's that disconnect between how most Americans think of poverty and how
yeah,
most people in material poverty are experiencing it creates a problem. And so the book
yeah.
is trying to address that problem.
And I love that because I've shared with you when we met that I was in poverty, like true poverty,
Hmm.
where it's like we couldn't even
Hmm.
afford food. We'd often have the lights turned off. And when you said that, I was like, yeah, that makes sense, is that the harder part to overcome wasn't getting my education, it wasn't getting out of poor paying jobs. Like it really wasn't about that, but it was the mindset that I had where it was like I would get the money and I would blow it very quickly. And you were just like, yeah, because what people weren't addressing with you is the psychological standpoint. But it's so true. Like when I look back and like look at my journals of how I felt, it was an emotional, mental, and spiritual disconnect that I was just like, I feel less than human. I feel like people don't care about me. And people are like, well, just change it with money. And it's like, that doesn't do anything. There's a poverty mindset that has to be addressed as well as the financial and physical, us being in that kind of environment. So, can you walk me through, like, if you were to sit with me and I came to you today in that mindset of just like, where would you actually start with my process and my story? If I came to you and said, like, look, former foster youth, I can't figure it out. I'm trying all the things. What would that conversation look like?
Oh, Denisha, what an incredible question. So let's imagine, let me just give a little more context. Let's
Absolutely.
imagine that, yeah, let's imagine that I am a church or I'm the front
Mhm.
line of a church's ministry, and a person walks in off of the street saying, I can't pay my electric bill. So every church in the country experiences this scenario. Well, that person, the way we should work with a person like that is to really understand how has God wired this human being, and how has God wired me? And most of us start off with a material understanding of what a human being is. Human beings are consuming robots. And as an economist, I've been trained to think of human beings that way, as rational material agents. But what the Bible gives us, this is a little bit of background. I'm going to get to your question.
Oh,
But the Bible,
take your
yeah,
time.
what the Bible teaches us is the human being isn't just a body. We are bodies with souls, but the way that the Western church has tended to interpret that is that the body contains a soul the way that a cup contains water. Whereas in the Bible, the body and the soul are actually highly integrated. So what happens to us physically affects us spiritually. What happens to us spiritually affects us physically. But there's more. And this last part
Yeah.
is the part that is so difficult for most Americans to understand. God is inherently a relational being. From all eternity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost exist in deep community, loving community with one another. And God has made us in his image. And so we are deeply wired for relationship. We're not just bodies.
Yeah.
We're not just bodies that contain souls. We're highly integrated body, soul, relational thingies. And until we until we understand that the relational part is actually part of our personhood, that it's part of our anthropology, if you will, we're going to mess this up. And again,
Yeah.
Americans, we really struggle to I'm the worst at this, by the way. I'm a good theorist. I'm really bad in practice. My staff call me Dr. Relationship because I'm all about the theory of it. I don't want to actually have any relationships, but it's a really a problem. And so we're hardwired for relationship, for community, and that's the foundation. That's the foundation of our
Yeah.
personhood. And so what happens when that woman walks into our church asking for help with her electric bill, we're tending to view her out of the wrong understanding of what a human being is. And once we understand the deeply relational nature of the human being, suddenly it's not about, do I write the check or not? Do I give her the money or not? Everybody I know wants to know, do I write the check or not? And
Yeah.
that's such a small issue compared to what's really going on. What's really going on is brokenness in relationships with
Yeah.
God, self, others,
Wow.
and creation. And so we've got to, so with that framework, what I would do is I would start off with the biblical story. And what I mean by that is the Bible starts with Genesis 1, not Genesis chapter 3. Genesis 1 is about the creation of goodness and of each of us being created with dignity and worth and capacity. And so this person is coming to me from a perspective of need, a perspective of fallenness, and I will tend to talk to her that way. What I need to do is to switch it and say, you've
Right.
been here so many times asking for help, and I'm sure you're tired of that. Could we go
Yeah.
deeper? Could we actually
Yeah.
get at the root causes? And let's start off with who you are. What gifts and abilities has God given you? What are your dreams? How could you use your gifts and abilities to achieve your dreams? How could we walk with you in that process? So it's changing from a needs-based approach to an asset-based approach, rooted in the story of the
Right.
Bible, Genesis 1.
Yeah. And that when you ask that too, I'm sitting there for a minute and I was like thinking about when I was in that position, I was like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what my giftings are. I haven't been able to think about that. But being asked that question, where I grew up in the church, but then left for a little bit and then found
Yeah,
another church community that they were a lot of people were like, Danisha, like, who are you? What do you want to stand for? Let's figure some of that out. And some of these were two,
yes,
three conversations, and that was it. but it left an imprint on my heart that that was actually what mattered more than someone handing me $20. I mean, I slept in my car for a year. I was moved 33 times from 18 to 24. At some point I'm like, well, at some point someone should open their home. But it's people did, but the conversations that I had with people was what left an imprint more on my heart, because I forgot how many times I moved. I had to only figure that out from the going and looking at how many times I changed my address. But the conversations, how people met me, that meant more to me, or didn't meet me. Maybe they're like, I remember someone saying, like, you just need to go home and apologize to your parents. And it was like, there was a whole story behind that before. It would have been so much better if they had said, like, can you tell me, where have you been? Who are you? What have you gone through? Not just like get over yourself and go figure it out on your own. It
Yep.
was, they
Yep.
brought me into community. And so
That's it.
that's what we need to do. And I don't, like you said, we don't do that well. So, man, like, do you want to dig more into anything before
Yeah.
I ask another? Okay, go for it. Like, I'm
But
like
Tanisha,
learning.
I've read your story a bit, and you are the
Mm,
embodiment of everything that I'm trying to say. And what you
yeah.
just said is exactly right. We're all looking for community. A way
Yes.
of thinking
Yes.
about it is God made us a certain kind of creature.
Yeah.
Again, we are body soul relational thingies. We're body soul relational creatures, and He put us in a habitat
Yeah.
that was perfect for human flourishing. That was the Garden of Eden. And so we
Yeah.
ought to ask ourselves, what were the conditions of that habitat? What were the conditions of Eden? And some might be saying, well, why do we want to go back to Eden? Well, actually, God's whole story is about restoring us to the conditions of Eden.
Mm,
In
mm,
Revelation, the images of Eden restored, not in the form of a garden, but in the form of a city whose
yeah.
conditions, whose habitat, whose environment is conducive to human flourishing. At the center of that, is deep communion with God and with others.
Mm,
And so the image in Scripture is deep community, family. And we've all been are
mm,
suffering from having been cast out of God's presence. And we're not
yeah.
living in the right habitat. And so we're all
Right.
longing to go home. We're all
Yeah.
longing to go home. And every child without parents feels this in
Mm,
a deep way. We're all longing for home. And
yeah.
so home is the answer. It's home.
Yeah.
How do we provide home for people? That's it.
Mm. I love that, because that's definitely what when I start to get where I feel disconnected, I'm always like, oh, I just want to go home. I
Uh-huh.
don't want to be in this area. I just want to go home. And for me, I jumped around so much that home was people. Home was
Oh
actually
my. Mhm.
community versus a physical location. And I think that that's why I was able to survive, was because of the community around me. I knew I had a home to go to, which was people, but I
Yep.
didn't really have a physical location.
Yeah.
But I think what goes through my head is sometimes I'm like, oh, we think like, oh, okay, like you said, do we cut the check? Do we give them the food? Do we just give them this money and hope they do good? But we're not even getting to that next level of like, where do we invite them into community? And that's what
That's
you're
it.
talking about. You're like, cool, feed them dinner. There's a verse about that, is like, give a man a fish or teach him how to fish. And it's like, let's sit down with someone and say, okay, how can we change this direction for you? Yes, it's different when drugs are involved or alcoholism is involved or abuse is involved, but it is one of those things that all of those situations can change. And we've seen it change when someone is in community and being seen, known, and loved. So it's not impossible, but it feels impossible.
But you
So
got it.
we gotta try. We gotta
You've
try.
got it. But Denisha, what you just hit on something that's so crucial for Americans to understand.
Mm,
The idea of teach a man to fish, kind of an idea fits with sort of
yeah.
the American story of kind of a rugged individualism. Work hard, and you will be able to flourish, and you can fish for yourself. And of course, there's truth in that story.
Right.
But what's so interesting is that if you think about God, God exists in community
Mm-hmm.
before He actually acts. So from all
Mm,
eternity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost existed in loving community It's out
Yeah.
of this, it's out of that loving community that God creates the world. And so
Yeah.
being in community precedes action. In the
Yeah.
Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had deep communion with God and with each other before they were told to be fruitful, multiply, increase in number, and subdue the earth. And so being
Mm,
in community precedes action. And
yeah.
so we tend to try to reverse it. The woman walks into our church asking for help with our electric bill, and we're going, you need to get a job. And how can I help you get a job? And we skip the community part, which
Yeah.
is the foundation for enabling her to have the confidence to pursue a job, and that you're going to be there for her when it doesn't work out very well. You need the
Yeah.
safety and security of the family, of the community.
100%. And that's what I think is so wild because it's, on this side of things, so I have a home and a car and a family of my own. There are moments where I sit back and I'm just like, why? Like I could see how that wouldn't be enough if I didn't have community and relationships that are healthy. And we see that with, people who become millionaires with lotteries or people who are actors who they have it all and then you find out they're depressed and they're like suicidal and you're like what's missing for them, and they say like you get to this top where everybody wants access to you just because of what you have, but they don't
Yep.
want me. And it's like
Yes.
that, I just like I want to hug them because I'm just like, oh, I know what that's like and that's sad.
Yes.
So we can't overlook the actual need is community. Yeah, the bill needs to be paid, yes, the lights need to be turned on, but at the same time what is the missing piece is community. So how do we move into that mindset?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it requires a huge shift in
Mm,
our understanding of what a human being is and of what human flourishing looks like.
mm-hmm.
Again, most of us are coming out of kind of a highly individualistic, pretty materialistic understanding of the human being. And,
Mm-hmm.
and the deep the understanding of us as deeply relational is missing. So let me just give you a quick
Yeah.
example. The Surgeon General has declared that loneliness has the same effects on life expectancy
Mm-hmm.
as smoking 15 cigarettes per day. It's because we're wired as relational
Wow.
creatures, and so loneliness, a broken relationship with others, actually affects us physically. Well,
Mm.
most of us aren't grasping this, and and
Yeah.
um, and so part of it is just a huge mental shift. And then we've got to start to develop different muscles. I'm
Mm.
an introvert. The truth of the matter is, when I go home at night, I want to shut the door and turn off the lights and watch ESPN and be left alone. And so,
I get
and
that.
so, yeah. And so I tend to withdraw from community. And I think I've been hurt by community. And so
Mm-hmm.
my approach tends to be go inward, but
Yeah.
that's not where human flourishing is. It's actually in opening ourselves up to
Yeah.
God and to others. And so part of it is we have to start practicing community again. We
Mm.
have to start figuring out how to hang out with our neighbors, how to have meals together, and
Yeah.
different habits that can sort of start. We were just talking before we get on here about exercise. And
Yep.
Danisha, neither one of us really enjoys exercising that
We're
much, but we
good.
know it's good for us, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so I think we need to take that approach to community.
Yeah.
We've lost sort of the muscles for that. We don't have the right muscle tone for that right now in Western
Yeah.
civilization. So
Yeah.
we've got to start exercising those muscles and developing the strength for that. And then as we're dealing with that materially poor people, the answer is simple. When that woman comes to our church asking for help with her electric bill, we can say, you know what, we're all having dinner tonight. Why don't you join us
Mm.
for dinner? Why don't you be part of our community? And so we need to foster a
Yeah.
community that we can invite others into.
Yes. I love that. And it was actually funny because this week I was on social media and there was a story of a young man who was homeless and he wanted to say like he wanted to go to churches to see like who was practicing Jesus, and someone's like, what do you mean practicing Jesus, aren't they Christians? And he's like, let me show you. So he walked
Uh-huh.
into different churches and he, people are like, oh, what do you need? And he's like, oh, just looking for a place to sleep. And they're like, oh, here's a shelter, and they moved him on. And then he went to one church where they were just like, hey, come eat with us. Like, this is so and so. Hey, brother, how are you? And he was like, that's the church that practices Jesus. because they're
That's
not
it.
just sending me on my way. And I kind of sat back and I was like, oh, oh, I gotta practice Jesus, not just learn Jesus. And that I think is so, that's really what's missing in the church right now is that aspect of community because we're just like, oh, we'll send him to a shelter, we'll send him in America, we'll send him off, we'll give the money, we'll walk away. But where was the invite to dinner? Where was the
That's it.
invitation to a conversation to where I'm like, oh, I'm not rushed, but like, hey, let's go to lunch together. You can tell me your story and like I'll come with me, hang out with me, I'll pay for you. Like that it's $20. But the
Yep.
difference is the $20 for lunch versus the communication is a lifetime of experience of like that person shifted and showed me Jesus. So
That's it.
that's so wild to me that it's something we've forgotten. And it's kind of like I think social media makes us closer together, but we're really further apart because we're like, oh, we got our people time, but we didn't get our community time. And
Yep.
that's been something I've really been looking into. So when we shift into when helping hurts, because I think a lot of people are like, well, if I give that money, it's going to hurt them, or they're going to use it mismanagement or whatever. What do you mean when you say when helping hurts?
Yeah. So again, most poor people are experiencing deep brokenness in their relationships with God, self, others, and creation. But the
Hmm.
thing is, I am experiencing brokenness in those four relationships too. It just
Yeah.
manifests itself differently. And
Right.
so the problem is that relationship with self really affects the dynamic between those with material resources and those who
Hmm.
don't have them. So let me unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
Most poor people, and I'm speaking here in broad generalities, but most materially poor people around the world and across the US, their relationship with self, again, is a sense of inferiority, a sense of incapacity, a sense that something has gone terribly wrong here with me, and
Hmm.
I can't seem to function the way other people do. And so there's a sense, we might call it a marred identity. Well,
Okay.
the problem is that in our culture, those of us who have material resources also have a broken relationship with ourselves, but it's
Mm.
the inverse. It's pride, it's superiority. I pulled
Mm.
myself up from my bootstraps. I worked hard in school. I'm successful. And so I've got a problem with pride and a problem with what some would call a God complex, a sense that because I'm better, I am anointed to bring my wisdom to save the rest of the world, especially people who are poor. And
Right.
so the dynamic that unfolds when the woman walks into my church asking for help with her electric bill, that she's feeling inferior, I'm feeling superior.
Mm.
And what happens is that the way that I speak to her, the things that I do with her, communicate that dynamic. They communicate you're less than human, you're less than I am,
Yeah.
and you need me to fix you. And
Mm.
that problem is exacerbated when we have a material understanding of human flourishing, a material understanding of
Yeah.
the good life, because then I've got the stuff. I've got the solution. I have what this person needs. I've got money. And so
Yeah.
I'm already coming at things from a posture of I'm better, you're worse. Now we're
Hmm.
adding in I've got the solution for you. You need me to fix you. And so what happens is we tend to take over. We tend to rush in. We tend to hurl money at problems, and that woman is going to be confirmed in her feelings of she can't do anything.
Yeah.
It's up to somebody else to fix her. Somebody who's got money needs to fix her, and so she's going to become more passive. And as
Yeah.
she becomes more passive, I'm going to get more disgusted. I knew she was good
Yeah.
for nothing. I knew that she was lazy. I knew that she wasn't
Mm.
thrifty, and so my pride is enhanced and her shame is enhanced. And both
Mm.
of us are worse off at the end of the day. That's what we're trying to get at. And so we need a different dynamic, a different
Yeah.
way of approaching this that affirms her dignity and that fosters more humility in me.
Yeah. There's my brain is going in like 100 different directions because there's times it's so interesting being on this side of things because there's been a few times where I have taken that approach where I'm like, you can't just get up off your butt and do it. And it's like, hold on, pause. Like you've been there. What is
Yes.
happening? And sometimes I think there was some of it where it was I was getting emotionally hit because it reminded me of that, but then there was that pride of just like, well, I earned my keep. Like, why are you asking me for help? But then I internalized that as like, well, now they're just doing stuff like what is it when like basically they're just learned helplessness where
Right.
they've learned how to be this way and they just need to undo it. But when I started listening to what you had to say and like listen to your book, I was like, oh, I missed that was a pride thing because we don't see it in action sometimes that we're like, well, I'm better than you. It's like, well, maybe that's not what we're telling ourselves. Maybe we like the title of being, I have a doctor in front of my name. So it's like, oh, well,
Yep.
I'm going to act like it and show everybody that I'm the person who's earned this spot instead of being humble when I walk into that room and be like, hey, we're all just people. That is just a title. That has nothing to do with who I am as a person. And I think that's part of what you're talking about is like we need to remember people and not just people. We need to know who we are, not as our titles and our money, because that only goes so far. We know that that stuff can go away in a split of a second, but our pride can really damage those relationships standing in front of us. And I just never thought about the other side where it's like, well, that person might have an increase in shame, that's why they're giving up because they're like, I can't amount to anything. Why even try? Everyone's right. I'm a failure. And you're just like, oh, this is a really ugly ripple effect because we let pride take over in our help. Now, I live
That's
in a
it.
state where there's a lot of homelessness and we throw money at it. Foster care is one of those things too. Tons of money are thrown at it. But what is missing is the community aspect. So, church or organization, how can we start building a very simple, just like do like 5 steps of like what can we do to start building community in that space?
Yeah. So the homeless population in America is arguably the hardest population to
Yeah,
work with. And so you've asked me a really hard question.
sorry.
Um, no, it's a great question, but there's a
Mm,
sense in which the homeless population is a really great illustrator of the point. So compare somebody in Indonesia just
mm,
after the tsunami hits. So the
yes.
tsunami hits them, and the folks are homeless. They don't
Hmm.
have adequate food, clothing, or shelter. Well, the homeless person that's on the street corner in my city is also lacking adequate food, clothing, and shelter. So on the
Right.
surface, they're the same, but we know they're not the same because the underlying brokenness is quite
Mm,
different. The
mm,
person in Indonesia might have been relatively healthy relationally and had
right.
something happen to them, like a tsunami. Whereas the homeless person on the street corner in America is typically suffering from a deep relational brokenness. And if you've ever
Yeah.
talked to homeless people, most homeless
Yeah.
people are people just like me. And what I mean by that is this. I'm a type A personality. I'm very driven. I'm a perfectionist. I'm an idealist.
Hmm.
When I was a little boy, my daddy said to me, "Don't ever drink."
Mm,
And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you're an alcoholic waiting to happen." And I said,
mm,
"What do you mean, Dad?" He said, "Brian, you're such a perfectionist. You're such an idealist. You're going to have a hard time
mm.
coping with the imperfections of life." And a lot of homeless people, when I've talked to them, it's that kind of story. They were
Yeah.
doing something and being productive, and something happened. Maybe their marriage fell apart. Maybe they lost their job. Something happened, and they couldn't cope with it. And so
Yeah.
they turned often to drugs or alcohol, not always that, but they couldn't handle the crisis. And so
Yeah.
a lot of folks who are homeless, they're just me.
Mm,
And they are me, and they didn't have the right support system, whatever it is. And you can't solve that problem by giving them $1 when you pull up at the traffic light and roll in the window and give them $1. You know good and well that what that's going to do is
mm,
enable them to be out there again tomorrow. You're putting a
mm.
band-aid over a cancer. And
Yeah.
it deadens the pain a little bit, but it allows the cancer to continue to grow. So
Mm.
the answer is always relationship. It's always
Yeah.
the answer. The problem is that with homeless people, their 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 relationship with others is so deeply and profoundly damaged that it's very difficult for them to accept the kind of help that will really help. Um,
Yeah.
there are experts on homelessness who would say it takes about 70 to 80 touches from an
Mm.
individual or a ministry for the homeless person to be willing to respond. And so what that means is when you're walking down the street and the homeless person is there, it typically takes 70 to 80 touches of what I don't mean physical
Mm.
touch, although it could include that, but touches of stopping and having a conversation before they'll even be open to the idea of walking with you across time in community. It's extremely difficult.
That's so hard. And one of the things I learned from the foster care side is that when they surveyed the US homeless population, 50% of them said that they had spent some time in the foster care system. So
Yep,
we know that we're bleeding foster youth
yep,
out, 20,000 every single year, 20,000 foster youth are bleeding into the streets because they have nowhere to go, but there is also the emotional abuse that they may have experienced,
totally.
physical, sexual, all of those things. And then
All that.
some of them do end up on drugs and alcohol or in jail or in
Hmm.
gangs. And it's like it's just this that there's so much money going toward it, but everyone's like, oh, it's broken. And I feel like we just that like every time someone says the system is broken, they can't help but shrug and be like, the system is broken. But we are the system. I learned that from a friend, her name's Angela Tucker, and she's like, guys, we are the system. And I'm like, whoa, pause. But to know that it's 70 to 80 touches that someone needs before they're like, okay, I'm a person. They actually do care. It is not just a social media moment for them. And
Hmm.
that's something that I met someone who was homeless, and he said, oh, do you want to take a picture of me? And I was like, excuse me? He goes, everyone who comes down this street wants to take pictures to post on social media. Do you want to take a
Yep.
picture of me? And I was like, no, I didn't even think about that. Hold up, what? And he explained, like, he's like, people would just come through, take a picture, and then leave. Like, they don't even help.
That's
They
it.
didn't clean up the street. And I was like, pause. Like, it just, there's so much happening. And really it comes back down to, you said, relationships. Is we are made for community, and we're not doing community well. And I understand that, like, some people are like, but my kid, alcoholism, drugs, they stole from me. How, what, I know it's not an easy question, but how can we love people who have done those things to us too from afar? Because sometimes it's not
Yeah.
safe to bring them back into our home.
No, again, I think so. We have to be wise about how we do that. But what if your church just had a meal every Wednesday night, just week
Mm.
in, week out, no matter what, we're going to get together for a meal on Wednesday nights. And the we there is members of our church, members of our community. We're just going to
Mm.
eat together on Monday nights. We're not going to try to accomplish anything. We're just going to be together. If
Mm.
that's happening, then you've got some community to invite people into. You can
Yeah.
invite the homeless person. It may take 70 touches, but eventually they're going to come and hang out and have dinner with you. And it's at
Yeah.
that moment that the relationships can start to begin. I've experienced this personally. I have a friend. The Lord kind of called my bluff. I was working on a book called Becoming Whole, and I was under contract, and I was missing all my deadlines. And I was pulling my hair out, and my anxiety was off the charts. I went for a walk one night
Mm.
in my neighborhood, and a fellow that I knew a little bit was standing there by his car, and he looked at me. I'm going to call him Bob right now. He looked at me and said, Brian, I have been evicted from my house. Could you help me?
Mm.
And I started to say, no, I'm too busy writing a book about how to help people who are poor to help you. And I thought, okay, God could strike me dead right this moment. I am
Oh,
the system. And your friend put it so well. I am the system.
yeah.
And
Mm.
so I thought, well, let me call my wife and she'll say no, and that'll get me out of this. And so So I called my wife and I said, honey, you know Bob? And she goes, yeah. I said, he's been evicted. He needs a place tonight. Can I
Mm.
bring him home? And she said, sure. So I'm like, okay, now I've got to bring Bob home. So now Bob is living on my sofa. And that
Mm.
was a really challenging experience. But,
Mhm.
it's really interesting. Uh, uh, that weekend, my wife needed to leave town for a conference. And so I was alone with Bob in my house all day. And
Mm.
I was in my study working on this book manuscript, and I was spitting nails. My stress was high. Um,
Mm.
and I was like, oh my word, woe is me. And I'm grumbling all day long writing this book. And Bob is cleaning my house. He wanted to help me out. So at
Mm.
the end of the day, I said, Bob, I could hear you talking to yourself all day. What's that all about? He goes, oh, he says, I've been thanking God all day for the chance to be in your house and for the chance to just work and serve you and to glorify God through my work. So here I am, spitting nails, writing a book and not glorifying God. And here's Bob, my
Mm.
homeless friend, who's doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Well, the next morning I got up
Yeah.
and on the dining room, on the kitchen table, he'd put a note, and he said, "Brian, your wife is coming home today. Why don't you get a dozen roses and put them right here?" And he had like a little arrow where I was supposed to put them. So here, so, so
Oh.
here's my homeless friend trying to teach me how to love God and love others,
Mm.
and that resulted in a friendship that's enduring to this day. and
Yeah.
and it's all about community. It's all about walking together. And if I'm
Mm.
out on the road speaking somewhere and I'm always nervous before I speak, I will text Bob and say, Bob, I'm about to speak, would you please pray? And he'll stop
Mm.
anything. He'll stop whatever he's doing and fall on his
Mm.
knees and spend time praying for me. And so I've got a lot to learn from Bob. Bob teaches
Yeah.
me a lot about love and community that I need to
Yeah.
stop and pause and understand more deeply.
We're gonna need to meet Bob one day because we need to be Bob. Like that's just the hardest part. And I know that it like in my head I'm like, but I'm so busy and it's like, but we're not. How much more our time are we spending being anxious and angry and wasting time? Like I feel like after I'm in community, I'm like, let's go. I got that little energy and I'm like,
Me
oh, I'm
too.
so much more productive and I'm so much better and like I learn so much more from others. But when I try to do it on my own, I'm like, I have to teach everybody everything. And I'm like, that's not, I learn so much more from other people than I do from myself. It's just true.
Yep.
I love that. Is there,
Let me.
yeah, go
I
ahead.
want to share a little bit more about this story with you because
Yeah.
uh, so as I got to know Bob,
Hmm.
he told me that he struggles with obsessive compulsive disorder,
Okay.
and that
Oh,
leads to behavior. One of the an extreme version of that is hoarding, and so
yeah.
so part of his struggle is that he's a hoarder. It's terrible.
Mm, mm,
Well, what's kind of interesting is that in my own family, obsessive compulsive disorder is a problem, and
mm,
I struggle with it a bit. But the way that it manifests itself in my life is by working really hard.
mm-hmm.
And so here's two people with the same broken issue. For me, it manifests itself in being highly productive. For
Yeah.
him, it manifests itself in hoarding. But we're
Yeah.
actually struggling with the same underlying brokenness. I've just had some different life experiences. And
Mm.
so it's just interesting. And it turns out we have the same birthday. And
Oh,
so,
fun.
um, yeah. So again, it's about understanding that we're all broken. The gospel is
Yeah.
not that the good news of the gospel is not that we're okay. The good
Yeah.
news of the gospel is that we're not okay, that
Yeah.
we're all broken, that Jesus is okay and that he can heal us. That's the
Yeah.
approach we've got to take to walking well with people who are poor.
Mm. It's so wild because you think about like I know my mom really suffered with mental illness and like I've had panic and anxiety and sometimes like I don't want to be like her and I'm like pause like that's not what I need to tell myself. It was that it was never dealt with and it was never
Yeah.
addressed and there was things that was not that's internal to her. But it's like the only difference was that I had people come around and say, you don't have to live like that. You don't have to live
Mm-hmm.
depressed and anxious. And it's not just pray hard, hope for the best. It's like be in community, learn coping tools, read your Bible. Like that's when I'm at my best. I'm listening to worship music, I'm working out, I'm pouring into the Bible, and I'm writing and being in community with people. Like it's not just about my doing my tasks. I always am like, I'll just task it away. And then I'm like, why am I so anxious? Because I'm not actually being in community. That part, the community piece, like I'm like, oh, I'm still anxious after I did all my to-do list. That's not a good thing. And you know, there's definitely the mind, body, and spirit. And I think we're often forgetting about the community side, the spirit side of us, what we're designed as. And we think that we can, you know, some people I know, they've tried to medicate it away with antidepressants, and they're like, this still doesn't work. And it's like they pray a lot and they do all these things, but the things that they've done, like I do, is isolate when I'm in those moments instead of go into community. And my pastor once said, even when you would, especially when you feel that like he told me, he's like, when especially you feel that like get out of community feeling, go into community, because that is your internal instinct to say like, I want to run away, but you need to push in. And he's like, watch something happen every time that you show up, and it might be for you, it might be for someone else, but watch how God works. And so every time I have felt like I need to run away, I try to push in, and I show up in something. It's just beautiful moments of people finding community or me being seen. And that has kind of shifted how I look at like why I want to isolate. So when I feel that deep desire to just like not show up to anything, even church, I'm like, I got to go to church. That means I got to go to church today. But that was not something my mom was ever told. So she kind of like, she continued to isolate, and that led to more depression, more anxiety, more issues. And it was just no one ever just said like, when you feel that, do this, because community is where you need to be seen, loved, and known. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we end?
Just that it's just a joy to be with you. And
It's always a joy.
yeah, and you know what you were just saying, Tanisha, is so accurate. And what I would just say to our audience is what Denisha was just describing. If you multiply that by 1,000, that's what leads to homelessness. Is that we pull
Mm,
away from community, and as we get in a downward spiral, and then it's hard to get back into community again,
yeah.
and very hard. And so
Mm,
we're all this close to being homeless people. In fact,
mm,
there's a sense in which the story of Scripture is that we are homeless, but that Christ is inviting us
mm.
back home again.
I love that.
That's it.
That's a great reminder. You guys, if you have questions, please put them below. I'm going to link Brian's books and his ministry so you guys can follow along, in churches, organizations. If you guys have questions, you guys are free to reach out to the organization, ask questions, and partner together. Let's go build community today. We desperately need it in this world, especially now. I feel like more than ever, as we've lost our way with community. So thank you so much, Brian, for joining me. This was amazing. If you guys have, again, any questions, just leave them below. Have a great day,
Thank,
everybody. Bye.
thank you.